At my mother's lavish birthday party, they sat me at a garden table, alone, facing the koi pond, far from the glittering chandelier room where my siblings toasted success with Dom Perignon. "We thought you'd prefer the fresh air," Mom had said, her smile tight, her tone sharper than the chill in the spring breeze. I watched through the glass as they laughed, clinked glasses, and exchanged stories of partnerships and profits. Nobody asked what I'd been doing. Nobody knew. And that was exactly the way I'd. $10 billion. That's what was riding on the deal about to be signed, not in the banquet hall but on board the black jet descending onto the estate lawn. My jet, my company, my empire. While they marinated in their assumptions, I'd built something greater than any of them could imagine, and tonight their ignorance would be shattered, along with their champagne flutes, when the engines roared to a stop. Before the garden chairs and the icy smiles, there was once warmth in our home. I was 13 when Mom first called me her little CEO. Back then, it wasn't sarcasm. She'd watch me organize my toys into fake stores, draft lists of pretend expenses and revenues. "You've got a brain like your father's," she used to say, and I believed her. My father, Harold Moore, was a towering presence in both real estate and in my life. I idolized him. I used to sit in the back of the family Lincoln as he made calls to partners, whispering stock terms I didn't yet understand. He smelled like cedar wood and certainty. When I turned 16, he gave me a desk in the office, a real one, beside his. It was symbolic, but to me it meant everything. My siblings, Olivia and Carter, were never interested in business. Olivia loved fashion and curated her Instagram like it was a museum. Carter only cared about golf and glossy startup logos. I was the serious one. I spent summers filing paperwork, absorbing contracts, learning how not to flinch when people raised their voices in boardrooms. When Dad got sick during my senior year of college, I put my Stanford scholarship on hold to come home and help run things. Everyone said it was noble. Everyone except Mom. "She needs a break from all that tech," she said at brunch one Sunday. "It was always just a phase." I remember sitting quietly as they spoke about me in third person. I remember nodding when they said I was doing fine, when inside I was building my first product demo on 2 hours of sleep and borrowed server space. Despite everything, I loved them deeply. I was the one who planned Mom's 55th birthday surprise, organizing catering and flowers while Olivia live-tweeted the dress code and Carter complained about parking. I was the one who sat with Dad through chemotherapy, who helped manage the trust when he lost capacity, who never missed a single family dinner even when my startup servers were crashing. They used to thank me, they used to hug me. But slowly, the hugs got stiffer, the thanks turned to silence, and then came the subtle demotions, Olivia's boyfriend seated beside Mom at Thanksgiving, while I was next to the coat rack. Carter getting looped into family finances while I was too busy with gadgets. Still, I held on. I thought love would bring them back, that if I just gave more, they'd remember who I was. That illusion broke slowly, and then all at once. It was a winter dinner, just before Christmas, when I first realized how far I had drifted from them. Mom was showing Carter a vintage wristwatch she planned to pass down to him. Dad's old Rolex. "It belongs with the future of the company," she said. They didn't even glance at me. I left early that night, stepping into the frost with a lump in my throat, not because I wanted the watch, but because I had once believed I was part of the future too. But still, I kept coming back, for birthdays, for graduations, for holidays. I kept showing up, bearing thoughtful gifts, answering tech questions, offering startup advice they never really took. There were rare moments when the past flickered back. One evening, when Dad had a lucid spell, he pulled me aside and asked if I still wrote code. "Your mind," he whispered, "could build things no one else sees." That night, I cried in the car. I missed the family who once saw me, the one that clapped at my 5th grade science fair project, the one that framed my acceptance letter to Stanford, the one that called me our little genius. They were fading. And no matter how many deals I closed, no matter how many jobs I created or patents I filed, they no longer saw me. Not really. Just a girl with a laptop, a guest on the lawn, a quiet placeholder in their glossy story. So I stopped trying to be visible. And I started building in silence. The signs weren't dramatic at first. They were whispers behind doors, quiet exclusions, shifts in tone so subtle they could almost be ignored. Oh, it started with Carter's wedding. The family put together a planning committee. Mom, Olivia, Carter's fiancé, but I wasn't included. "You're always working," Olivia had said. "We figured you wouldn't want the stress." I smiled and nodded, pretending not to notice when I was seated at the far end of the reception, near the kitchen doors, beside a cousin who barely remembered my name. Then came the email chains, family finances, trust fund allocations, estate questions, and my name was missing from all of them. Carter was now assisting Dad with strategy, according to Mom. When I asked why no one had shared the new budget reports with me, Carter laughed. "You're the one playing Silicon Valley with a laptop and some interns," he said. "We'll loop you in when it's time to reboot the Wi-Fi." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I'd already hired my first CTO. At family brunches, conversation rotated like clockwork. Carter's golf club ventures, Olivia's social media partnerships, Mom's charity dinners. If I tried to talk about my startup's traction or our recent angel investment, eyes glazed over. "That's nice, dear," Mom would say, before turning back to Olivia's story about being featured in a fashion blog. Eventually, I stopped bringing updates. I stopped bringing my laptop. I stopped correcting them when they said I was still figuring things out. Then came the public erasure. Our family's real estate firm was featured in a local magazine. Full spread, glossy photos, interviews with Dad, Carter, even Olivia. There was a paragraph about the Moore children, and I was mentioned only as currently exploring interests in tech. No name, no details. Like I was a ghost. At the annual Moore Foundation Gala, I wasn't on the speaker list. Instead, Olivia gave a speech about women in leadership, as if I hadn't been leading my company through 5 funding rounds. I stood at the back of the room in a navy blazer I'd worn for investor meetings in Singapore and San Francisco, holding a glass of water and wondering when I'd become a footnote. When Dad stepped off the stage, he walked right past me. I opened my mouth to speak, but he was already shaking hands with the mayor. The final blow came on Christmas Eve. We were sitting around the fireplace. Carter had brought a bottle of wine from a business partner in Napa. Olivia passed around scented candles she'd branded herself. When I handed out small boxes, handwritten thank you notes, and custom memory drives with digital photo archives I'd compiled for each family member, no one even opened them. Carter looked at the box, smirked, and said, "Is this another one of your beta projects?" I said nothing. I just smiled. The next morning, I wired $200,000, 0 cent, to my lead engineer to fast-track our infrastructure rebuild. If my family couldn't see value in what I was building, the world soon would. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. refining a pitch deck for a Series B round. I watched frost form on the windows of my childhood bedroom and realized something I should have known long ago. They weren't waiting for me to succeed. They were waiting for me to fail. In time, even their language changed. Carter started calling me the freelance one at family events. "She does computer stuff," he'd tell friends, waving vaguely as if I were a distant cousin, not his sister. Olivia once asked if I could help her friend build a website for exposure, as if my time was some hobby she could barter for perfume samples. Mom corrected me during dinner one night, not about politics or etiquette, but about my own job title. "You're not really a founder, sweetie," she said, slicing into her salmon. "Founders have employees, offices, investors, real operations." "We have all of those," I replied quietly. "Oh," she blinked. "But you work from home, right? That's not quite the same." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We just signed a lease for a 12,000 square foot space downtown. And yet, I kept showing up. Because despite everything, they were still my family. Because some foolish part of me still believed that if I just hit the right milestones, revenue, press, maybe an acquisition, they would see me again. The real me. But with every dismissal, every empty chair at the table, every time they toasted each other's mediocrity while ignoring my progress, I learned not to hate them. Just to outgrow them. I should have known something was off when the quarterly family meeting was scheduled without me. "We thought you were traveling," Mom said when I asked. "Besides, it's just legacy stuff. You've got your tech thing." She smiled, the kind that tightens more than it softens. So I let it go, for a week. Then, during a routine scan of corporate acquisition trails, something I did more often now that Phoenix X was expanding its real estate tech portfolio, I saw it. A shell entity, cleanly filed, perfectly layered under 2 holding firms in Nevada, had recently acquired a 27% stake in Moore Properties, my family's company, the same one they swore was not for sale, the same one Dad had built from scratch, the same one I used to pretend manage in his office when I was 10. The worst part? I had funded the purchase. Phoenix had seeded the acquisition through one of our satellite venture arms, a discretionary investment meant to pick up undervalued real estate firms. The decision had been made by my capital committee. It wasn't personal. It was strategic. And yet, It hit me like betrayal. They had sold off nearly a third of the company in silence. No call, no meeting, no mention, not even to say we're struggling. I double-checked the dates. The sale went through 2 days after Carter told me everything was perfectly on track. 2 days after Olivia mocked my little website hustle. 2 days after Mom hugged me goodbye and said, "Don't be a stranger, darling." I stared at the transaction log for a long time. Then I emailed my legal team and asked for full ownership breakdowns. Within hours I had the answer. Phoenix X, through layers of holdings, now owned 51% of more properties. The family had been offloading shares likely to cover mounting debt, and my firm had been the silent buyer. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. So I did neither. Instead, I walked to the balcony of my office, watched the city lights flicker below, and whispered, "You sold me the house I built with you." The next day, at a Sunday brunch, Mom casually mentioned they were restructuring to stay lean. Carter bragged about streamlining operations and bringing in new investors. Olivia lifted her mimosa. "You should take notes, Eliza. Real business isn't just coding." I took a sip of water, smiled faintly, and said, "I already did." They thought I meant the brunch. They had no idea I meant the company they no longer controlled. That night, I signed the final internal motion, a corporate resolution giving Phoenix X operational control over more properties. The betrayal was complete. But so was the beginning of something much bigger. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop replaying it all. The smirks, the deflections, the subtle shifting of power around the dinner table. I realized they hadn't just sold the company, they had sold me out. All while pretending I didn't exist. Worse, the more I looked into the firm's books, the more disturbing it became. More properties wasn't just financially strained, it was bleeding. Carter had funneled capital into luxury developments that hadn't passed zoning. Olivia had convinced Dad to invest in a media project that was now under litigation, and Mom, she had dipped into the pension reserves to cover event costs, charity galas, appearances. They hadn't just mismanaged it, they were killing it. And I, the one they excluded, was now responsible for saving it. My phone buzzed. A message from my CFO. Final sign-off on acquisition consolidation pending. "Would you like the press release embargoed?" I typed back, "Hold. I want them to hear it from me first." So I made a call. I asked for a meeting, just the 4 of us. No assistants, no lawyers, no spouses. We met at the Country Club Lounge, the same place where I'd once been asked to wait outside while the others held strategy sessions over wine and crab cakes. This time, I chose the head of the table. "Why are we here?" Carter asked, clearly annoyed. Olivia looked bored. Mom stirred her tea without looking up. I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the shareholder transfer summary, complete with the Phoenix X logo on top. "This is a joke," Carter muttered, scanning the pages. "This can't be." "It's real," I said calmly. "You sold to me, piece by piece, through intermediaries you never bothered to vet. I now control the company." Olivia's glass slipped from her hand, clinking against the saucer. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Would you have listened?" I asked. Silence. Mom looked up slowly. Her face was unreadable, but for the first time in years, she didn't speak with condescension. She spoke like someone cornered. "What are you going to do?" I leaned back in my chair. "Fix it. Rebuild what you nearly destroyed. But not for your pride, for the people who work there, for Dad's legacy, for the clients you forgot while chasing clout." Carter opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "You had your chance. You called me a hobbyist, a failure. You let me sit outside while you toasted yourselves." I stood. "The girl you ignored just bought your company." And then I walked out, not in anger but in clarity. Let them sit with what they'd lost, while I got to work saving what I gained. After the meeting at the country club, something in me cracked. On the surface, I'd won. I held the reins to a company my family once gatekept, but inside, I felt hollow. I'd stretched long. My appetite disappeared. I woke with headaches and avoided mirrors. There was no triumphant music playing in the background of my life, just silence, punctuated by the buzz of unread emails. For the first time since I left Stanford, I questioned everything. Had I built Phoenix X out of passion or pain? Did I chase success to prove something, or to escape someone? My confidence, once fierce and grounded, now flickered like a faulty light bulb. I stopped responding to investor updates, skipped internal check-ins. Even my assistant noticed. "Everything okay?" she asked gently one morning, coffee in hand. I lied. "Just tired." But the truth was harder. I wasn't just tired, I was unraveling. Then, a name lit up on my phone screen. Marcus Lee. My ex. We'd met at a VC networking dinner 3 years ago, bonded over late-night ramen and startup horror stories. We dated for almost a year before ambition pulled us in different directions. He went on to head a multi-billion-dollar venture fund. I went into the trenches, bootstrapping code and ramen alike. I hadn't spoken to him in months. But his message was simple. "Heard about the acquisition, can we talk?" I hesitated, then replied, "Tomorrow, noon, my office." He showed up early. In charcoal blazer, same calm focus, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "You look tired," he said honestly. "I feel worse," I replied. I didn't plan to cry, but I did, quietly, halfway through explaining how hollow victory felt, how the people I loved most had never seen me, how I'd poured everything into building something real, only to feel like nothing at all. Marcus listened, not as an investor, not as an ex, but as someone who remembered who I was before all this. "Eliza," he said, "do you know how rare it is to be exactly right about something and still doubt yourself?" I didn't answer. He continued, "You didn't win because they lost. You won because you never stopped building. Even when no one clapped, even when they told you it wouldn't matter." Then he placed a slim envelope on the table. "Feed for your next round, if you want it." I blinked. "You're investing?" "I believe in people who build, especially when they rebuild." That night I stayed late at the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I reopened the prototype folder I'd abandoned weeks ago, a machine learning platform we'd been testing quietly to solve tenant fraud. I dusted off my notes, called my CTO, and said 3 words I hadn't used in weeks. "Let's begin again." Over the next few days, I let myself move slower, not out of weakness, but intention. I walked to work, I journaled, I ate a real breakfast for the first time in weeks. And then I called Dad's old friend, the one who used to run finance back when More Properties was still agile, still hungry. He was retired now, but I wanted his take on a strategy I was forming. After our hour-long call, he laughed. "You sound like Harold, only smarter." That made me cry again. But it was the good kind. I kept going. I met with my engineers, reviewed security patches, cleaned up our roadmap. The more I re-engaged, the more I remembered why I started. I never wanted spotlight. I wanted systems that worked, solutions that scaled. I wanted impact, not applause. Marcus sent me another message later that week. "Your clarity is showing." That night, I reopened my investor deck and started writing from scratch. Not because I had to pitch again, but because for the first time in weeks, I actually knew what I wanted to build next. Not for them. For me. For the girl who sat outside family meetings and still brought strategy notes. For the founder who once coded through heartbreak. For the leader I was becoming even in the silence. Phoenix X wasn't the end of my story. It was just the first fire. And I still had so many sparks left to throw. Phoenix X didn't start in a tower. It began in a cramped co-working space above a laundromat, with walls thin enough to hear dryers rumble and toddlers scream. But it was mine. With Marcus's seed investment and a rekindled fire, I moved fast. I hired 2 engineers from my college days, both brilliant, both underpaid, and we worked through nights, fueled by cheap sushi and whiteboards filled with madness. We didn't build an app. We built an engine software that could automate tenant risk analysis for mid-size real estate firms. At first, nobody cared. Then, one landlord doubled their revenue after using our pilot. Another slashed fraud by 80%. Within 5 months, we had 6 paying clients. By month 7, a firm in Hong Kong offered to license the tech. That's when I realized this wasn't just a product, it was a platform. I restructured the business, rebuilt the deck, reached out to an old contact at Azora Capital in Singapore. They sent a team to vet us out as 20, and 2 weeks later, transferred $12 million, 0 cents, into our Series A. We moved out of the laundromat that same month. With capital came reach. I began acquiring startups no one paid attention to, tiny firms with brilliant code bases and tired founders, one AI product in Hanoi, a data scrubbing tool in Seoul, a security analytics team from Tel Aviv. One by one, they became part of Phoenix X. We weren't loud, we were lethal. And no one, not Carter, not Olivia, not even Mom, had a clue. The best part? I didn't need to hide. I just didn't tell. While my family posed at galas and posted photo ops, I was quietly signing NDAs and term sheets across 3 continents. My COO once joked, "Your empire has more firewalls than Forbes has subscribers." By year 2, we hit $80 million, 0 cents in recurring revenue. By year 3, we were named one of Asia's top 10 stealth tech firms. I gave no interviews, took no panels, just kept building. Then came the real estate pivot. A whisper from an old contact in Dubai, legacy firms looking for digital transformation, desperate for data intelligence. I sent a pitch deck with no logo, no name, just numbers. We landed our first $40 million 0 cents transformation contract in 4 days. After that, the dominoes fell. Dubai, Jakarta, Toronto, Lagos. And then finally, the name Phoenix X began appearing in internal memos of the very institutions that once laughed at me. I didn't gloat. I grew. Quietly. Ferociously. What made it sweeter was the silence. No headlines, no LinkedIn announcements, just steady growth under radar, the kind that made venture analysts whisper but never point. Every Friday, I'd walk into our new glass office on the 37th floor, pause at the panoramic window, and let myself feel it. Calm, earned progress. We reinvested aggressively, built infrastructure in Singapore, opened a think tank in Bangalore, tested satellite Bob geodata modeling with a research team in Zurich. We turned down a $300 million 0 cents acquisition offer just to prove we could. And still, my family had no idea. One night, while I reviewed a licensing deal with a firm in Tokyo, I got a group text from Carter. Olivia just landed a beauty brand collab, dinner at Mom's to celebrate. No mention of me, again. So I smiled, muted the thread, and signed the Japan contract. Another $9 million, 0 cents. Later that year, Phoenix X was invited to join a global fintech accelerator, invitational, valuation above $1,200 million, 0 cents required. We cleared the bar without blinking. One evening Marcus called. "You realize," he said, "you've built $1 billion company in less than 4 years." I looked out at the skyline, lights dancing across mirrored buildings, and said, "And they still think I'm unemployed." He laughed. "Let them." We launched a private beta for government compliance contracts next. Military-grade encryption, international banking clients. I wore the same thrifted coat to every signing. By the time Forbes finally called, offering a feature, a cover, anything, I said no. Success didn't need announcement. It just needed direction. And I had it now. Not because of them, but despite them. And that made all the difference. The invitation arrived on thick cream paper, engraved with gold trim. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Victoria Moore's 65th birthday." It was hosted at the Latham Regency, the kind of hotel that offered champagne with check-in and knew your favorite flower by the second visit. The RSVP list was a who's who of social elites, political donors, fashion influencers, and of course, the Moore children. When I arrived, I wore black, sleek, custom-cut, deliberately unremarkable. I was escorted in by a polite hostess who smiled and gestured toward the side exit. "I'm afraid your table is on the terrace. The main room is quite full." Of course it was. I stepped outside. The garden was stunning. Manicured hedges, koi pond glistening, roses trained to climb trellises like soldiers. But it wasn't a seat of honor. It was exile. I could see through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Carter holding court in a navy tux, Olivia laughing too loud in a red satin gown. My mother, radiant under the chandelier, raised her flute in a toast I couldn't hear. A waiter brought me a glass of water. "The champagne is reserved for inside guests, miss." I smiled politely, checked my phone. The message had arrived. 8 to 4 minutes, all parties in position, Phoenix X security on standby. I looked up at the perfect blue sky, and then I heard it. The low thrum of blades. At first, no one noticed. The music indoors drowned out the sound, but as the rotor chop grew louder, heads began to turn. The glass doors vibrated. Olivia stepped toward the window, confused. Carter frowned. And then, like a scene ripped from a film, the sleek black helicopter descended onto the lawn. Its tail bore the unmistakable silver insignia, Phoenix X. I stood slowly, placing my napkin beside the untouched bread roll. The doors of the chopper opened. Out stepped my general counsel, flanked by 2 assistants, all dressed in executive black. The last to emerge was my CFO, tall, calm, carrying a briefcase. He walked directly to me. "Eliza Moore," he said loud enough for the nearest window crowd to hear. "We need your signature. The acquisition is complete pending execution." I took the pen from his outstretched hand. "Which acquisition?" I asked softly, though I already knew. He opened the briefcase. Inside were contracts bearing the Moore Properties seal. My family's company. "My team just notified the board. It's official as of 5 minutes ago. You are now the majority shareholder." Through the glass, I saw Carter's champagne flute fall from his hand. Olivia's mouth moved, but no sound reached me. My mother stood frozen, hand still raised mid-tusk. I signed. The CFO nodded, relayed confirmation into his earpiece, and stepped aside. I took a slow step forward, entering the ballroom through the glass doors. The music had stopped. All eyes turned. Conversations fell silent. "Lisa," Mom's voice wavered. I looked around the room. "Apologies for the interruption. I wasn't planning to make a speech." No one moved. But since we're celebrating legacies, I turned toward the head table. I thought it might be nice to mention that the Moore legacy now has a new steward. I let the silence stretch. "I bought the company." The gasps rippled like wind through silk. "While you were posting collabs and toasting investors," I continued, "I was acquiring every subsidiary, every asset, every liability, until the last vote tipped." "You," Carter tried but couldn't finish. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for responsibility." My gaze swept the room. "And just to be clear, I wasn't seated outside because I didn't belong. You put me there. But from now on, I own the building." Then I turned, walked back to the terrace, and boarded the helicopter. We lifted into the sky, leaving their silence behind. Let them sit in the garden this time. I had a company to run. As the chopper rose above the hotel's glittering roofline, I glanced down once more. They hadn't moved. My mother's flute still hovered in midair. Carter had stepped away from the table, jaw clenched so tight I could see it from the sky. Olivia leaned on the piano, her glossy heels trembling just enough to betray her. For years, I had watched them from the outside, imagining what it would feel like to be seen. Not as a burden, not as an embarrassment, but as an equal. I didn't need that anymore. Now, I owned the firm whose board once dismissed my opinions. I controlled the buildings they hosted their luncheons in. The marketing agency that managed Olivia's brand? Subsidiary. The equity firm Carter once bragged about courting? Quietly funded through Phoenix X. My phone buzzed with a new notification. The acquisition had made headlines. Phoenix X CEO executes surprise takeover of Moore Properties. Family unaware. The caption beneath a frozen photo showed me walking through the glass doors, pen in hand, expression calm. Below that, another alert. Forbes confirms Eliza Moore now among top 5 youngest self-made billionaires in tech. Marcus texted a few minutes later. "That was brutal and brilliant." "They'll be fine," I replied. "They've still got each other." He sent a winking emoji, then a final line. "Your table's ready now." I laughed for the first time in weeks, a real laugh. Not from triumph, but from release. I'd finally stopped needing a seat at their table. Because I had built my own. And the view was infinitely better from the top. 3 days after the party, the text started. First from Carter, "We should talk, about the company, about everything." Then from Mom, "I may have misjudged some things. Come to Sunday dinner." I didn't reply to either. Instead, I forwarded both messages to my assistant with a note. Archive, title, Post-Storm Diplomacy. Because that's what it was. Not guilt, not love, strategy. Back at Moore Properties, things moved quickly. I called in an audit. The numbers were worse than I thought. Nepotism hires, vanity projects, strategic partnerships that bled money just to save face. Carter's name was all over them. I held a closed-door board meeting. By the end of it, the vote was unanimous. Carter was removed from all executive duties, his access revoked by noon. The next day, he tried to barge into my office. "You can't do this," he hissed. "I already did." "You're destroying our legacy," I said coldly. "I'm saving it, from you." As for Mom, she tried a softer tactic. Lunch invitations, a delivery of roses, even a handwritten letter tucked inside my Forbes cover, circled with hearts. "Eliza," it began, "I always knew you were special, just didn't know how to say it." I stopped reading after that. Where was this affection when I needed rent for my prototype, when they laughed at my hoodie in family photos, when they told my cousins I was still figuring things out? Now, they wanted forgiveness wrapped in flattery. But I wasn't interested in revisionist warmth. I restructured the company, cut 40% of bloated middle management, put in a merit-based promotion pipeline, launched a community housing initiative using AI logistics, something I pitched years ago and was ignored for. And then, quietly, I renamed the firm FamilyTruths Real Assets. More properties became a footnote. Carter left the country for a sabbatical. Olivia rebranded herself as a mindfulness coach. And my mother? She stopped hosting galas, sold her townhouse, moved in with a cousin out of state. The last message she sent me was simple: "I miss you." I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because silence, for once, spoke truer than anything I could say. They lost me long before I ever won. They just didn't notice until I was too far ahead to chase. The board sent a formal notice to Mom as well. Her honorary title of Founder Emerita was officially revoked, not out of malice, but because she no longer served the firm's future. For years, she sat at the table, nodding while decisions were made in my absence. She could have spoken up, she could have asked once, just once, what I was building. But she didn't. She liked the story where Eliza was the quiet disappointment. It made her shine brighter. Now, even the club committees had stopped calling. Without the more name holding weight in corporate circles, social invitations dried up fast. Meanwhile, Phoenix X was thriving. We opened a training institute for underprivileged youth interested in real estate tech. Carter's old office became a co-working hub for minority-led startups. The same walls that once shut me out were now painted with murals about resilience and second chances. When the press asked me about the transition, I kept it brief. Leadership should reflect contribution, not inheritance. That quote went viral. In private, I reviewed the old photos, childhood birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations where I was always slightly outside the frame. In every one, I searched for proof they'd seen me. Never found it. Now, when I walked into boardrooms, people stood. They listened, not because I was loud, but because I had earned it. Her followers on social media dwindled by the week. Olivia posted inspirational quotes over filtered yoga poses, and Mom, once the queen of society pages, was now just another widow of a fading name. Sometimes I wondered if they truly regretted what they did. Then I remembered, regret doesn't fix damage, only accountability does. And I was done paying the bill for their blindness. My legacy wasn't built on revenge. It was built on remembering who I was, what they weren't, and how I'd never need them to define me again. It didn't happen overnight. Building Phoenix X took years of quiet discipline, long nights, and the kind of grit no one ever noticed, not even the people who claimed to love me most. But looking back, I wouldn't erase a single rejection. The terrace seat, the silent dinners, the emails left unanswered. Every one of them was a weight that shaped me not into something bitter but into something solid. I didn't destroy the people who doubted me. I outgrew them. I didn't build Phoenix X to prove anyone wrong. I built it because I believed there had to be a place in the world where competence wasn't measured by outfits, or last names, or volume. Where quiet could be powerful. Where persistence could be louder than performance. And in the end, I didn't seek revenge. I sought excellence. It's funny, success changes how people treat you. Suddenly, the same opinions they once brushed aside become gospel. The same voice they talked over becomes a keynote speaker. But I never forgot the silence. It kept me honest. The more I grew, the more I realized power wasn't in the throne, it was in the choice to walk away from it. One morning, I returned to the old country club. Not to attend a gala, but to meet a local nonprofit interested in using part of the space for underprivileged youth workshops. As I waited in the garden, yes, the same one I'd been exiled to, a waiter came over, new and nervous. "Would you like to sit inside, Miss Moore? We can prepare the boardroom." I looked at the glass doors, at the chandelier flickering in early sunlight. "No," I said with a smile, "the garden's fine." And it was. Because this time, I chose the seat. Years later, when a reporter asked what drove me most, I just wanted to build something real, I answered, something that lasts longer than applause. He paused, then asked, any advice for others who feel underestimated? I nodded. Don't waste energy proving them wrong, use it to become undeniable. The article ended with a quote that people would repost for months. Never judge someone by the seat they were once given, they might just end up owning the entire room. And that was the truth. I never needed the head of the table. I just needed space enough to rise. And when I did, I brought my own table and made sure it had room for others like me. Later that week, I spoke at a university's commencement. Standing in front of thousands of graduates in caps and gowns, I remembered my own. No one had come to my ceremony that year. My family had a golf retreat. I had walked the stage alone, then gone straight back to my rented apartment to work on code. I told the students that story. And then I told them this. Your value isn't determined by applause or proximity to power. It's measured by the change you create when no one's watching. A few months after, a small scholarship was created in my name for young women in tech who'd been underestimated. We called it the Garden Seat Grant. Because sometimes, the people they place on the patio are the ones quietly building empires. Sometimes, the best view of the future starts from outside the glass doors. And sometimes, the only person who needs to believe in you is you. The day I got the final valuation report, Phoenix X officially worth over $12.7 billion, 0 cents. I was alone in my office. No champagne. Just tea. A quiet nod to the girl who started with a second-hand laptop and a dream no one else could see. I didn't need to post it. I just smiled. Then opened the next proposal. Because success was never the finish line. It was just the beginning. And I was only getting started.